Evening, citizens. It's been kind of more difficult getting back into this than I thought. Finding the time to write scripts and stuff is something. Actually, I don't know why I'm having you looking at my ugly mug when there's something far more interesting over there. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, that's better. You get a nice view now. But yeah, it has been difficult trying to get back into this, and the reason I stopped doing this, as I've said before, is because as I said, that I ran out of things to say. And it's not that I've run out of things to say on each issue, necessarily, but more that we are being assaulted on so many fronts all at the same time that it's difficult trying to produce a coherent response to anything, because everything, so many things seem so urgent. Now I'm wondering if maybe people are beginning to feel a sense of urgency now. You know, it's hard to say in our little echo chamber, to see what the normies are actually thinking. It's not clear. But there is a sense of, in some areas, a sense of desperation. My personal feelings are that the two biggest clear and present dangers are the cashless society, because that's the thing that really frightens me. And the other thing is, and I never used to think of this as being quite so serious, is the illegal immigration. And we've had that example of the guy who tried to firebomb the immigration centre down in Dover, or wherever it was. Manston it might have been, I can't remember now, but yeah, chucked a few Molotov cocktails in there and then promptly went off and killed himself. Now, in a way, if you're commentating on this from the position of the mainstream media, that's all really quite convenient that he went and did that, because you can characterise him as being the angry low nut, the Lee Harvey Oswald of this, and you can also, there's also a moral equivalent as well to that, with what with all the Islamist suicide bombers. You can just say, well, that's the same kind of person, only on the far right. And so, you know, I'm sure I haven't read much about this guy, except to say that I'm sure that he will be characterised as someone who had been radicalised, and he was full of hate. And maybe that is true. You know, maybe he was full of hate. But as usual, there'll be no attempt to try to discover why he took such an extreme action. In the same way that when that piece of garbage that blew all those children up at the Manchester Arena. You know, there won't be any sort of efforts to understand. I mean, it's slightly different actually, because what the response to that was, you know, candlelit vigils, and, you know, we won't resort to anger, and the Oasis song "Don't Look Back in Anger" and all the rest of it, when anger is actually the appropriate response. And they bent over backwards to exonerate the religion that he did it in the name of. And of course we should make a distinction between Muslims and Islamists. And it does seem as if that's all the difference in the world. But when it comes to this guy who tried to bomb the immigration centre, he will just be dismissed. And it will be considered, you know, further proof that there are hateful people out there. Now, you know, when it comes to the Islamist suicide bombers, the normal commentary on it are that those suicide bombers are cowardly. Now, I'm not sure that that's really right. I mean, they may be vicious and nasty and unforgivable, but I'm not sure that you can really say that a suicide bomber is cowardly necessarily. Because now, no matter how misguided they might have been, they have actually sacrificed their own life. You know, and this is not to give them any sort of credit, of course. But there are lots of things that you could say about them, and probably cowardice isn't probably one of them. I mean, you could say, I mean, people often say that people who commit suicide are cowardly, you know, which I've always thought was really quite unfair, really, because people are never going to take that decision lightly. But this guy who attacked the immigration centre, you know, he knew that. I mean, let's, for argument's sake, say that he thought about what's happening. He knows he's not going to stop. He knows that no amount of words or no amount of pressure is going to make any difference, that the politicians aren't going to do anything, that the RNLI and the Border Force are going to continue to operate as a taxi service to illegal immigration, and that there is quite obviously no political will to stop it whatsoever. And so he, you know, perhaps quite reasonably believes that something extreme has to happen. And he did it. And is anybody going to have a candlelit vigil for him? You know, he didn't kill anybody, but, you know, perhaps he tried to. Perhaps he would have liked to. Who can tell? But now he's dead. And he's dead because he obviously knew that there was no way back for him once he'd done that. And this is what will happen. that people will see that there's nothing is going to stop this unless I personally do something. I mean, not reading the newspapers or watching the television, it's difficult to know what the continued media story on this. It appears to me like it's just fallen out of the headlines and it won't be revisited because, you know, it raises too many awkward questions. But I would be very surprised if it has not been framed as a way to say that the far right is full of hate. But this is what happens when things don't get done, when the most obvious, the most reasonable mitigation efforts are never even tried. And then, so, you know, i.e. to stop them coming in the first place. And then, because they keep coming, the people in government, or some people in government, come up with some out-of-the-box solution, like sending them all to Rwanda. Now, as far as I know, not one of them's been sent to Rwanda yet, but the very threat of the idea seems to be beyond the pale in quite a lot of people's minds, that it can't be. You know, when Priti Patel tried to do something, she was demonised unbelievably. Now Suella Braverman is facing the same thing. It's now Sunday afternoon. I wouldn't be at all surprised if I wake up tomorrow morning and find that she's out of a job, because that's what happens. But we are reaching the point where people will do things, drastic things. I'm not even going to say extreme, but drastic things, because the non-drastic things are not being done. The other day I was on my way to work and there's a little cut through a little lane, which is a really good little cut through, and it cuts out a really traffic clogged road near I am. But it's quite a narrow lane. It's one of those narrow lanes that you can, you know, in some bits you can just squeeze two cars past, but you know, you have to keep going off into the hedge. And it's perfectly all right, and people can do that so long as it's only cars. And maybe normal sized transit vans. You know, they seem a bit big, but they're actually no wider than quite a lot of big cars, no wider than a Range Rover, for instance. And the trouble is that people go down there in box vans, you know, the Ocado supermarket vans. The people go down there and then they meet another one coming the other way, and then they're stuck. And we went down there and it was stuck solid. And there was a big high top sort of transit type van, long wheelbase one, so it seemed bigger, but it wasn't actually any wider than the Range Rover. But there was also a box van coming the other way, and they were just jammed tight and nobody could move. And I sat there for a few minutes like everyone else does, you know, thinking it might clear in a minute. Sat there for a good 5 minutes and I thought, this isn't moving at all. So I got out of my car and I locked it, and I walked up, you know, maybe sort of 20 cars in front of me to find out what's going on with these two vans. And I went up there and saw that there was nothing behind them, and everybody just sort of sitting there waiting for somebody else to do something, and nothing happened. So I moved back down towards my car and I said, look, I said to one driver, if you get off into this driveway, everyone can move a car forward. Which he did, and everybody did move a car forward. I went up to the guy in the long wheelbase high top van, and you know, I spoke to him through the window. I said, you can just move forward a bit, you know. And he says, am I going to hit anything? I said, no, you're not going to hit anything, just move forward. And so he did, and then the box van was able to get by, and then the traffic jam was over. The traffic jam vanished, and I went back to my car. You know, there was a few cars waiting behind me, sort of wondering what I was doing. And I got into my car and everybody went along. Everyone went on their way. And that was just an example of just, you know, in that sort of very low-key manner, I was doing something which might have been considered quite drastic. I actually got out of my car and left it in the middle of a traffic jam. But I did that, and it solved a problem. And I know it's not a perfect analogy, obviously, but maybe that guy thought that it was time for somebody to do something drastic. Like I say, because all the non-drastic things hadn't been done. And of course, this immigration issue, this immigration debate is going to be, it is tied up with the, you know, albeit maybe separated by a generation or two, it's tied up with the grooming gangs. And people will conflate the two things, and sometimes they'll conflate them erroneously, and sometimes they won't. And I was talking to Mrs. X about this the other day, and she hasn't really been following this too much about the grooming gangs and stuff, but you know, she was always quite dismissive of the sort of Me Too movement. You know, she's quite a realist about such things like that, and she thought it was a lot of a lot of, you know, attention seeking from all these Hollywood types. You know, essentially that, you know, these young starlets knew what they were getting into, and so she's never been she's never particularly sympathetic to the Me Too sort of stuff. But she was asking me, she said, why are you getting so worked up about it? And I was saying, well, this is what is happening, and it's happening all over the place. And when the story broke in, I think it was 2011 or it might be 2014, when that, to give him his due, that mainstream journalist Andrew Norfolk broke the story. And the thing about that is that it was such a scandal, that it should have jolted every police force and every local authority and every local politician all over the country to sit up and think, bloody hell, this stuff's been going on and we didn't know about it. Of course, the thing is that we know that so many of them did know exactly what was going on, but once the story had broken, you would have thought that all of the authorities all up and down the country would have thought, we can't let this go on any longer, and would have made moves to stop it all dead in its tracks. And that and then there would have been reams and reams of prosecutions, but all that should have happened after that should have been, you take down the things that are still going on and then make sure nothing ever happens again. And then what you do then is you mop up all the historical cases. That's what should have happened. I mean, it shouldn't have happened in the first place, but the fact that it had, and then the story broke, that's what should have happened. But we find out it's still going on now. It's still going on now. How on earth can that be? How on earth can it be possible that that's still happening? You know, it doesn't make any sense at all. And I was saying to Mrs. X, well, you know, one of the things that I get upset and antagonised, you know, and energised about the whole thing for all sorts of obvious reasons, which I needn't go into. But there are other things. The fact is that this is happening on my watch. You know, I'm not a policeman, I'm not a local councillor, I'm not a local politician, but it's happening whilst I'm alive in this country, whilst I'm a citizen of this country. And I feel shamed by it. I feel shamed that that's happening whilst I'm alive. Now, I don't know any of these girls. I don't live in the place where it's, well, I supposedly don't live in the place where it's all been going on. I don't know any of these girls. And so you could say, well, I don't really care about them. Well, I suppose that's true in a sense, in that nobody really cares about anybody that they don't know. But that kind of suggests that nobody cares about anything or anybody that is not right in front of them, that they don't know personally. And of course, this is one of the accusations that is levelled at people like Tommy Robinson, saying, well, he doesn't care about them really. All he's concerned about is his racist narrative. Well, I suppose that could be true. But I don't think that's logical that that's true. I mean, like myself, I don't suppose that Tommy Robinson knows any of these girls. He might know them since it's all broken out, since the whole story's has been in the news. But he probably didn't know any of them personally. But that doesn't mean that he shouldn't do anything because he doesn't know any of them personally. And it's kind of illogical to suggest that he wouldn't care about them at all. I mean, obviously he doesn't care about them as much as he cares about his own children. I mean, that's true of anybody. But it's just not logical to suggest that his supposed hatred for non-white people eclipses everything else, you know. I mean, as it happens, I don't think he is a racist. I don't think he is. I just don't think he. And you know, and I actually quite admire him in a way, in the way that he has been prepared to be despised, and that shows a real moral courage. But how could anybody hearing about such a story not care about the girls involved? How could they not care? It doesn't seem logical that a normal human being, and I'm not even talking about an exceptionally compassionate human being, just a normal human being, and particularly a normal human being who might have daughters, that would not be concerned about such a thing, even though it wasn't their own daughters. It doesn't seem... It seems beyond possibility that anybody who was in any position to do anything about it did nothing. It doesn't even seem logical to me. And yet that is what happened. And it happened, as I've said before, because the people who were there supposedly to stop it happening not only didn't give a shit about the girls involved, but they actively thought that they fucking deserved it. I mean, what sort of moral abdication is that? I mean, if I met some of these teenage girls, these tearaway girls, and some of them were tearaways, and some of them, like, you know, on drugs and drink and all sorts of things, you know, I might not like them very much. I might think, fucking hell, she's a bit bloody, oh God, I'm glad my daughter's not like that. And you think, fucking hell, how did she turn out like that? You know, I might think that. And I might think, well, I don't want this girl anywhere near my girls. You might think that. You know, and, you know, it might be reasonable to think that. But to think that they fucking deserved it because they were just like that, it just suggests to me that that there are things going on that perhaps ordinary people just don't understand. Just, you know, we could call it evil. I don't know what to call it. But it doesn't seem normal, it doesn't seem moral. It doesn't even seem logical. And of course we need to be conscious of the fact that there are things happening so heinous that we might think we have to do something drastic. And you know, it does seem as if we are being provoked into doing drastic things, and we have to be wary of that. You know, being provoked on purpose in order to elicit a response which may seem justified. The fact that the media frames things in a way which is quite obviously perverse shows that they are quite obviously following an agenda. You know, there's no logical refutation of that. It isn't logical. But anyway, once again, I'm sorry it's not. It's just been a bit of stream of consciousness here, and not a proper script with a thought out argument. But I am just trying to get back into this, so but it does seem as if we're getting to our crunch point, and things do look as if they've got to get some worse by some distance yet before they're ever going to get better. So everybody take care, and I'll see you next time.